please put your hands together for Ms. Theresa Gattung.
Thank you for those kind words, and it's great to be here because it feels like spring has come. It feels like Auckland and New Zealand had 2 weeks of winter, unless you live down south, of course, and now spring is here, so it's just great. Well, what I thought I'd do today is share a little of my story, pretty much focused on lessons learned in business and life, and spend the majority of the time on my food bag, in particular the customer focus that really is at the heart of my food bag. And I did want to leave a little bit of time at the end for people to ask questions, since we have a whole hour. And I'm happy to take questions on anything, even if I don't actually cover it in the presentation. So I've called my presentation Dare to Dream, because that really has been the story of my life, has really been about having the good fortune to grow up in a well-loved family with parents who thought anything was possible. And so for me, I never let anyone say, oh, well, you're just a girl from Rotorua and you can't go for it. And that's very much what I love about New Zealand and why I've chosen to actually live here. So my story starts with my parents, Marion and John Gattung, who are both still alive today and happily married and live in the Bay of Plenty, which is my spiritual home because I grew up there. My father they're both from the wrong side of the tracks in London, and they grew up in a situation where no one had tertiary study. People tended to do what their families had always done. So it wasn't really a breakout, imagine it and you can be it type upbringing. Anyway, my father got drafted into the army, and after a couple of years outside of his environment, he realised that actually there was a huge world. He came back, he met my mother at a dance. She was 18 years old at the time, and she thought that she'd been left on the shelf. 6 weeks later, he said to her, Marion, I'm going to live in New Zealand. And she said, what about me? And he said, well, you're coming too. She's told me many times since that if she'd known how far away it was, she never would have said yes. So they hopped on the boat, 6 weeks courtship, but a year engagement. So that was how it was in those days. They hopped on the boat, came to New Zealand. That was the only way you could come then. And somewhere along that route, I was conceived, which is why I attribute my lifelong love of water and being near water. So they settled in New Zealand, 10-pound poms, busy capitalising the family benefit to build their first house, etc. And I was the first of 4 children, 4 daughters. Now, the reason that is significant is because my father didn't have any brothers, only 5 sisters. So he had 5 sisters and 4 daughters. So a very, very female-centric home life. And he totally brought all of us up, my sisters and I, really, girls can do anything that boys can do. Actually, someone said something very funny to me the other day, who was also about my age, early 50s, and had been brought up in that environment. And she said, they told us that girls could do anything boys could do, but they didn't tell us that girls would end up doing everything and the boys would end up doing whatever they wanted, but we would be doing everything. Nevertheless, it was that time of feeling that anything was possible, and so that was very much the background that I had. Now, my parents were also Catholic, and although I am now a retired Catholic, again, there's a few more stories about that which we may or may not get round to. Again, that sense of wanting to give back and life not just being about your own getting your own needs met is something that is very much deep in my family, and really, particularly in the last decade, has been a very joyful part of my life. I was quite a girly swat at school, and I was also quite opinionated and quite bossy. And I went to a small Catholic school in Rotorua. It was called MacKillop College. Most of you will never have heard of it, because it got absorbed with the boys' school next door and ended up being called John Paul College. Anyway, in my final year at school, I told the principal that I thought there was a better way for her to run the school assembly. She didn't really appreciate that. She asked me into her office and she said, "Theresa, if you don't learn to keep a still tongue in your head, you will never be happily married." I was speechless, absolutely gobsmacked. It took about 30 years for me to see that she might have had a point. That Catholic girls' school, though, was very good role modelling of leadership because the nuns led the school. They taught in the classrooms and they actually managed the school. And so again, I had real live experience of role modelling of women actually managing, leading, governing. And it's really important that girls get to see women in leadership roles in business, in politics, in the world, because then they get to understand that it might be possible for them. And I was actually filming a video this morning with people from the media, and I was saying, look, it's so fantastic that there have been so many television programs with female presidents of America, because sort of America has to see it on screen before they can do it in real life. You know, it's like we're visual people, and if you actually see that imprint either in real life or in the media around us, then it actually gets normalised. So I left 7th form and I went to Waikato University. Now, I did a business degree in economics and marketing, and I also did lots of other things, including women's studies. It's probably still pretty unusual now to do a business degree and lots of papers in women's studies. 30 years ago, it was really weird. There's no other word for it, weird. And what I found is that I really didn't fit in. There were hardly any girls in business school, and there were hardly any capitalists in women's studies. So, you know, this was well before the time of conscious capitalism, or the idea that you could integrate things and create a whole new thing, which in a way is actually what we've done with My Food Bag. This was when the world pre-internet still sat in quite rigid boxes. You are a charity, or you are a business only really caring about making money for the shareholders. So I didn't fit in, and I learnt quite early on that sometimes you have a choice between being popular or being respected, being popular or being true to yourself. Now, your own self and what you're passionate about and what you believe in, you might be ahead of the crowd, you might be behind the crowd, you might just be an aberration off to the side. But I learnt that actually you feel much better if you hold true to the principles that are driving you, even if that means that around you it's quite hard to build relationships. So I finished that degree, but I wouldn't say that those years were the most satisfying of my life. It was while I was at business school, though, that I started reading about the dearth of women in business, and I decided I'd like to run a large company before I was 40. And this photo is up because when I made that decision, I started dressing in suits. And that's because I believed then and I believe now in the power of as if. If you want something badly enough and you see yourself doing it, you create pictures of it happening, you live as if it has already happened, you absolutely maximise the chances of indeed it happening. You can't control as much about life as we'd all like to think we can, but you absolutely maximise the chance of it happening. So I started going to university dressed like this. Yes, weird as well. Now, my boyfriend at the time was tall, dark, and good looking, and he thought this was a cool idea. And so he bought one suit and every colour Pierre Cardin shirt that you could buy, and we went off to business school together looking like that. And about 6 months later, he came out as gay. So you might say I should have had an inkling, but anyway, we're still friends many, many years later. So I left business school, and I still had this Joan of Arc. I'd like to, save the world, be a lawyer. I'd had great difficulty in my seventh form year deciding what I was going to study. So I went to Wellington and I did a law degree. About halfway through that law degree, I collapsed. I was physically unwell for a year. And I finally I had all sorts of people tell me, it's in your head. I finally got referred to the head of dentistry at Wellington Hospital, who's since passed away. And he said to me, you've got temporal mandibular joint syndrome. I'd had many teeth drilled by this time. And it's triggered by stress. And I said, who? Me? Stressed? Wrong. Sheila. I did, though, then start to do some things that have stood me in good stead for the last 30 years since then. I realised that if you don't actually look after yourself, then you cannot perform at your peak, and you certainly can't look after other people as well. So that was when I decided that I would always make sure that I got sufficient sleep. I read, as you all do read, about extraordinary women who can get by on 4 or 5 or 6 hours sleep a night. I'm here to tell you I need 9. I need 9. If I am not in bed by 10 o'clock, you don't want to know me the next day. And so I organised my life around getting enough rest. I must have rest. I need to exercise, otherwise I go a bit. And I do that first thing every day by swimming, which I find relaxing and energising all at the same time. And I think morning is good because then it's done for the day. But people have different patterns. Honour your own patterns. Some people want to blow off steam at the end of the day. At that point, I really cleaned up my diet. Pretty obviously, I added sugar back in many years ago. But that linkage between looking after yourself and making time for yourself so that you can actually manage, we lose that in a busy world, and it's got worse now. The internet is the tyranny of the urgent over what really matters. And so I say to all business groups, when I speak to all business groups, men and women, you don't need to worry about managing your workloads. You don't even really need to worry about managing work-life balance, because that's sort of an odd concept, but you do need to manage rest, because everything comes at you 24/7. That's all the time, all the time. There's more mobile phones in New Zealand than there are toothbrushes. I mean, we've all got 2 mobile devices each, and it can just be overwhelming. And so you need to work out what's your pattern, honour your own patterns, and be productive. And sometimes that can take courage. I remember when I started at Telecom, General Manager Marketing, reporting to the Chief Operating Officer, and my boss then was an American guy who started early. He was an early bird. He was in the office by 6:30 and probably gone about 6. So he worked 12 hours a day, as everyone did, but he started early. And so he had team meetings early. He had team meetings at 7:30 a.m. And I said to him, I'm not actually sure whether it was an interview process or day one, but I said, Ben, look, for me to work well, I have to be exercising at 7:30 in the morning. Would it be possible to start our team meetings at 8:30? He said, sure, no problem. I'm here, but that doesn't matter. So we started our team meetings at 8:30. One by one, and I'm the new person, right? The new kid in town asking this. One by one, my 7 colleagues on that team came to me and said, thank God you said that, Theresa, because we all hate the early starts too, but we didn't know how to say anything about it. So, figure out what patterns work for you, and as much as you can, try and organise things that support your patterns. Okay, so I decided towards the end of my law degree that I would do the law fraternity a good turn and not become a lawyer. But I finished my law degree, and it has been very useful in my business career. Because I had a law degree and a business degree, and I was watching too much Divinia Prince on TV, I decided I wanted to be an investment banker. Wrong idea if you're a Sheila in those days. As some of you know, that industry has settled discrimination claims in the last few years. It's been a very difficult place for women to advance. So after I had had many rejections, I was finally told it was because I was a woman. And I was gobsmacked because I hadn't really come across discrimination. But my father always used to say, when a door shuts, find a window. And so I decided that I would find a job in financial services, but obviously it wasn't going to be investment banking. And I got a job at National Mutual. At the time I was working at TVNZ. So National Mutual insurance wasn't nearly as sexy as TVNZ. And it was a sideways move. I went from market research manager at TVNZ to market research manager at National Mutual. But what I found in that job was priceless. And what I found there was that business and life, but particularly business, because this is where I think some people go wrong, is not about positional power. So I've worked in situations where positional power is actually quite important. In banking, positional power is quite important. You've got to have credit limits, credit authorities, etc. But if you work in the agricultural industry, there is no positional power. Every farmer is the CEO of their own business. So I went to National Mutual, became the head of marketing, and as I actually went out to talk to people who were self-employed, because all the agents and consultants were self-employed, it was their time, it was their money. If they didn't want to rock up in Whangarei or in Invercargill to listen to the marketing Sheila from Wellington, they didn't have to. I could be speaking to an empty room. So what I learned by my mid-20s, which has stood me in really good stead, is that personal power is really the basis of leadership. And that if there's any disconnect between what you say and what you do, what you say will always trump. What you do will always trump what you say. So, personal power is about being impeccable with your word, doing what you say you'll do, believing in whatever cause you're talking about, whatever product you're selling. I can't begin to tell you, quite often, I get asked, or not often, but occasionally I get asked, do you really eat my food bag? And I go, every night. I mean, why wouldn't you? Who here is on my food bag? It's quite a few. But the idea that you could own a business and then not believe in it is anathema to me. And whether you are running your own business or you're working for someone else, it's someone else's business, you have to actually have that integrity and that belief in the business, because if you don't, people will feel it. And if they feel that you are not acting in integrity, then you will not be able to achieve success in business, nor actually in life. And the internet has exacerbated that, because it used to be that bosses could put themselves in corner rooms with their secretary outside and guarding the gate. And that can't happen now. Because if you or me want to get anyone on the planet, just figure out what the email address is for their company, put their name in, and they'll pick it up on their iPhone wherever they are in the world. They may or may not answer you, but people are very accessible. And truths ring true because the internet is completely anarchic, and one person's view is as valuable as anybody else's. I realised that things had really shifted a few years ago when I love fashion. I noticed that the front row seats and the big fashion shows in the world were no longer just the preserve of the editors of Vogue. Fashion bloggers were now right up there. And I thought, everything is really shifting, and that's definitely another one of my messages today. Okay, I also totally believe in seizing opportunities. I absolutely think that in life, we end up regretting the path we didn't take, because even if the path we take doesn't work out, we'll make some lifelong friends, we'll learn something. For myself, I have not regretted anything I've done, but I have occasionally regretted things that I didn't do. So I was working at National Mutual, and I saw the opportunity to become the head of marketing at the BNZ in an ad. I rang the recruiter. He said, it's too late, the job's closed. I pleaded and pleaded. I drove for several hours that weekend. I met him, and long story short, I got the job. I was skipping, there's a lot more to it than that, but I have to keep going or I'm going to run out of time to talk about everything. I was skipping down the road, Willis Street, Wellington, the first day of that job, Chief Manager Marketing at the Bank of New Zealand, biggest bank in New Zealand. I had hardly got my bum on my seat when my boss, who was a CEO's secretary, called and said, will you please come up and see Lindsay? Lindsay Pine was the CEO. I sat down and he said, look, I have to explain something I couldn't explain in the interview process, which is that we're about to have a financial restructuring. Well, we would call that a bailout, right? It was the $700 million bailout of the BNZ that day. So I've been hired as the head of marketing. There's no internet, and the bank's being bailed out. Oh dear. Oh dear. I thought to myself, what have I done? How can we get customers? How can we keep customers? How are we going to get and keep staff from running for the exits? But the team that Lindsay had put together was an amazing executive team. Many of us went on to be CEOs. Rob Fife, Air New Zealand, Sam Knowles, Kiwi Bank, Rod Carr, University of Canterbury. It's actually another person. Anyway, it was a fantastic team. And we basically pulled together and turned that organisation around over several years. And what I learnt was that, you know, even in the most difficult of times, there's a silver lining. And of course, when an organisation is in crisis, there's no politics. Everyone does pull together. Now, that group of people actually, interestingly, have all gone on to run big companies, but they've also all gone on to either set up or take entrepreneurial companies to scale. So something about being in a big company that collapses around you and then having to set it up again very much encouraged in us some perhaps more entrepreneurial flair than you might normally find if you had a corporate career. Anyway, I loved that job. And then one day, 3.5 years later, Lindsay walked in and said the bank had been bought and he was leaving. And poof, he was gone in a fluff of smoke that day. And I cried because I loved working for him and I loved my team. So NAB bought the BNZ and smartly they left the BNZ brand and they've gone from strength to strength. But quite early on I felt that it didn't suit me and I started thinking about what else I might do. Again, here's the thing about seizing opportunities. I'm not a very good driver. My car's parked right down the end, so don't have to worry. Anyway, I drove my car off the road that day on the way home and I flagged down the person behind me to help me put it back on the road. I took them to lunch to say thank you. They turned out to be the head of marketing at Telecom and they were about to announce that they were retiring and going back to the US. And I thought, this is interesting. This is about the only job in New Zealand in marketing bigger than the one I've got. And so I tried to get it, and I couldn't get it. I wasn't successful. And I was getting very frustrated. I couldn't get the recruiter to meet me, and I finally rang my mentor, Sharon Lord, who had been the highest ranked woman at the Pentagon. And I'd met her because in my early 20s, when I decided I was going to run a large company, I started keeping a clipping file of women who had succeeded at high levels in organisations. And when I was at the BNZ on board the VIP Supporters Club boat off the coast of San Diego, watching the Kiwis, not glamorous, I get seasick, so I was not feeling well, not as glamorous as it sounds, I saw this woman with both an American flag and a Kiwi flag, and I thought, my goodness, that looks like Sharon Lord. So I went over to her and I said, Dr. Sharon Lord, you don't know me. My name is Theresa Gattung and you're in my clipping file. Well, you wouldn't do that today because you could Google anyone, anytime. But what was fascinating was that she had married Tom Burns. He was about to become the CEO of Telecom. This was before Roderick Dean. And they were about to come and live in New Zealand. They were about to come and live in Wellington. They were about to come and live in McFarlane Street across the road from me. Where I went every day. I actually lived in a very nearby suburb, but I went there every day. So it was one of those moments in life. It was one of those moments in life, truly, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. Which is why I know many men who read books, non-fiction, but they dismiss fiction, but you shouldn't. Because you can learn a lot reading fiction. Sometimes it mirrors life. It's weird. Anyway, she became a mentor to me and helped me through that difficult stage of middle management to senior management. So back to the story. So she said to me, you should contact the CEO, who was Roderick. I said, I don't know him. She said, well, what have you got to lose? And that's an important lesson, because sometimes we don't take the risk. We don't put ourselves out there. We go, oh, I've only got half the things they want in that job. Oh, I put my CV in and I haven't heard. And, you know, or we just make assumptions to protect ourselves, because better to assume we wouldn't have been successful than to really go for it and be rejected. But if you do that often enough, your life gets smaller, not bigger. And we all want to get bigger and have more expansive lives as we go on and as we learn in life. We don't want to contract. That's why I've always hired people smarter than me. The first thing I do whenever I get into a management job is I find who could replace me. And if they're not already in the organisation, I bring them into my team. Well, if they're in the organisation but not my team, I bring them into my team. And if they're not in the organisation, I hire them. Because women in particular sort of fall into the trap of thinking they're indispensable. Yep, okay, you can be indispensable and you'll be in that job forever. So you have to make it easy to be replaced, to move ahead. I'm not saying you have to move ahead. If you don't want to, that's fine. But if you do, the strategy and tactics, you've got to think about, how would a person with great confidence, just think about most men, how would they handle the situation? They wouldn't sit there and be waited to be asked about being promoted. They'd make it clear that they're up for promotion. They'd make sure they had figured out who they could bring through to replace them, and they would actually project confidence about it. So I've always done that whenever I've gone into situations. So here I was, being really forced to confront, did I have the guts to put myself forward when I felt like I'd already been rejected? Anyway, you know, it would be great to say, well, of course, I got Roderick and he said, oh, where have you been all my life, Theresa? But life isn't like that. I didn't get Roderick because he didn't know me from a bar of soap, and I didn't get his assistant. I managed to get put through to the woman who answered phones in the HR department. And I fought my way in to an interview with the head of HR, who was insightful enough to think, look, this might be a good fit. So many stories later, I got the job. But that was interesting too. First of all, I took a role which went sideways. I reported to the CEO at the BNZ, and I took a job at Telecom reporting to the Chief Operating Officer, who reported to the CEO. That's definitely a sideways move. They had already offered the job to someone else who turned it down because it didn't report to the CEO. Now the thing is, that's very short-sighted, because in life, there's no such thing as a fixed playbook. You change the possibilities of every situation you go into simply because you are there with your skills, your intent, your wisdom. Just like when you leave a situation, sometimes it can be like getting out of the water. It closes behind you, it's like you were never there. Trust me, I've been in that situation too. So, you know, if you feel blocked, you should shift, you should change, because eventually it will impact on your self-esteem. So there I was at Telecom. The first day at Telecom, I was given a cell phone when I needed a separate bag, because it was so big, and a pager. A pager. I mean, I feel stupid even telling you that. A pager. The technology shift in that, I was at Telecom for 13 years, the technology shift over that time was phenomenal. Now, of course, people don't change as much as technology can shift. People don't change as much. But the technology shift of the internet has changed the environment we operate in. While I was at Telecom, I was CEO for nearly 8 years. Early in that period, or maybe just a bit before that, I came back from overseas, was part of a panel conversation about the internet, and we were talking about what it was and that it was coming. And a woman in the audience said, that would be terrible. And we asked, why would that be terrible? And she said, because then we wouldn't know what to think. Well, the audience laughed, the idea that, you know, I don't know, what was she thinking? Traditional media tell us what to think. But she was actually really prescient because the internet is anarchic. Totally has, I don't know whether we want to be a mass communicative global world, better interconnected, and therefore we created the technology to enable that, or whether the technology has meant that's happened. But it's completely shifted the world I grew up in, which was very top down, was very the boss or the president or the person at the top of the organisation telling people what to do. And when I became CEO of Telecom, my then partner, John, said to me, you should go and watch some John Wayne movies, because that will tell you, because Telecom had a lot of American investors, and that will tell you about the psychology of, America. And I'm going to come back to that point, but you know the John Wayne model. John Wayne rides into town, he has one sidekick, sorts the village out, and he rides off happy clapping. And blow me down, earlier in the year, I wasn't in America, I was in Europe, and I was reading international press, and there was a picture like this slide here, but with a gun. He had a gun, clearly had a gun, behind Donald Trump presenting. I think my mouth fell open at the breakfast table, because that model, the one person at the top who's going to sort it all out. I mean, haven't you heard someone say that recently? Many, many ways. There's such a fight going on for, in a way, I guess, I would call it almost the soul. It's like that model of top-down leadership, and you do hear it a little bit in the American vernacular, that idea of commander-in-chief, one person at the top who, sort everything out, is actually completely different from the energy of the internet, which is actually about standing in your personal power, communicating, collaborating, taking input from a variety of people, and then moving forward. There's a fight going on, I think, because we have seen that every institution has feet of clay. There's no one's going to walk into the room and have all the answers. It doesn't really matter whether it's the finance sector. Turns out they didn't know any more about financial derivatives than we do. It doesn't matter. Everything has been shown to make it clear that no one institution actually has all-seeing, all-knowing, and we just go, okay, we'll follow that. Anyway, obviously, while I was CEO, I had lots of opportunity to be in the US, and twice I went to the Bill Gates CEO Summit at his house in Seattle, which is fascinating. The house is lovely. Not usual to have security guards in the garden, I grant you, but nevertheless a very nice home. And on the second time there, I plucked up the courage to ask Warren Buffett, his good mate, on a panel conversation, how is it that you guys are so wedded to the idea of this commander-in-chief notion? You have one person who's both chair and CEO, and you didn't follow the British system of governance with a chair and a CEO, a separation of powers. And he looked at me as if I was very thick, and he said, how could you have more than the one jockey on the one horse? And so there you go. I mean, that model of one person leading versus a model of shared leadership and collaboration. So after 8 years of telecom, I was exhausted, but I wrote a book while it was still fresh called Building a Wire about a lot of my experiences and the things that had happened, and that was fantastic. And that set me on a path to doing a lot of speaking and being approached about lots of other things. Now, one of those people who approached me in that time was Celia Robinson. And she had briefly worked at Telecom, and her husband, James Robinson, had worked in Telecom for several years. She's Swedish, and she met James on her first day in New Zealand. They got married and decided to stay here. She decided to stay here. But on a trip back home to Sweden, she saw a company called Linus Matkass doing this dinner kits. And she thought this could really work in New Zealand. When she came back, she wrote up the business plan. And I was advising her in her other business, Au Pair Link. And I had just split up from my partner of 20 years, and he'd done the cooking in our house. So I had the benefit of someone else shopping and cooking for me to support me in my corporate career for 20 years. But suddenly I have the problem that most women have. What's for dinner tonight? Feed me baby at 10 o'clock. What's for dinner tonight? It's still our problem. 85% of my food bag customers are women. So even in situations where the men help cook, usually it's still the woman who decides what is going to be outsourced and how this is all going to work for the family. So I looked at this business case and I said, this could work. As long as we execute this well, this could work. So we said, well, we know lots about business and online, but we don't know very much about cooking. Who would be the best person? Who is our biggest imaginable person we can bring in who could do this? And we said, Nadia Lim. She had the previous year won MasterChef. And I had a sneaky suspicion that a person that young winning MasterChef must have a bit of grit, a bit of determination, as well as lots of talent, all of which proved to be true. So Celia and James approached Nadia and her husband Carlos, and they said yes, and the 5 of us set up my food bag. I did ask myself a question: is it smart to go into business with 2 married couples? You know, if there's any splitsville here, this could be very awkward. Luckily, 4 years later, and 2 children later, 1 each, they're still all very happily married. So that's Nadia. She needs no introduction. Myself and Celia in. That's sort of the current My Food Bag kitchen. The business has grown so fast that we keep moving premises, and in fact we have to move premises again. So, probably can't read that. Can you guys see that or not? No, okay. So we started My Food Bag with the concept of a couple of offerings. Offering for couples. So you guys, a lot of you on it. So you get delivered 3, 4, 5 nights food, the ingredients, the recipes, and it comes beautifully packaged on a Sunday at a time that you select. So to me, it feels like Christmas every Sunday opening this. We started with really only 2 products: a product for couples, the gourmet bag, and a product for families, the classic bag. From very early on, we decided that the customer service team, which we call the customer love team, would be the heartbeat of our organisation and the centre of our market intelligence. And our whole product development roadmap has been based on what feedback we get from the customer love team every day. We empowered them straight away. I mean, at one level, we didn't want them calling us every 5 minutes on a Sunday on delivery day. But another level, we understood that with hundreds, and now of course thousands of couriers going out all around New Zealand, millions of ingredients and being delivered, they had to have the ability to do something about that missing meat pack immediately. They couldn't be checking in. And so we empowered the customer love team to use their best judgment in every situation. We don't have a review that goes, oh, you've done this much in customer credits, that's terrible. We just use your best judgment. And we make sure that it's staffed up, because on a Sunday, people can contact us by phone, by text, by Facebook, by Viber, by email, by just every mechanism possible. So we have to be able to respond to however our customers contact us and deal with it immediately. And Celia and James, who are the co-CEOs of My Food Bag, lead from the front. When they come into the office each morning, the first team they go to is the customer love team. We're on Parnell Road. The customer love team are over the road, and the IT team are under us. And we're trying to find a space where we can all sort of aggregate again. But as you can imagine, with 12 cooks, we need a big commercial kitchen and, you know, quite a lot of space. So the customer love team has been one of the biggest teams, if not the biggest team, from the beginning. It's the heartbeat of the organisation, and it has been our product roadmap. It became obvious we needed a family bag for younger children. We did that. It became obvious we needed a vegetarian bag because customers were asking for it. We did that. It's worked really well. It became obvious that we needed a gluten-free bag because customers were asking for it. We did that. Not everything has been successful. We launched a barbecue bag. The reason you haven't heard about it is because we only sold about 12 and then we pulled it. And that's because we weren't solving a problem. Turns out that people quite like putting meat on the barbie over summer, and so we're not solving a problem. But there's never any blame or shoot the messenger at My Food Bag. We are relentless about not telling ourselves stories, about looking at what's happened, listening to customer feedback, course correcting, and then just moving on. Just moving on. We very much follow the do it and course correct because pace is really important. Now, we're not reckless. For vegetarian bag, we did quite a lot of market research because none of us are vegetarians, so clearly we're not the target market. And in doing that, we found some interesting things. The core benefit of my food bag generally has been the convenience of it and the speed of being able to put it all together, the free range, the quality of the meals, etc. What we found in the vegetarian bag research is that some of these people are soaking beans at night. They don't need to put a meal on the table in 20 minutes. They're looking for inspiration. So the core values of that bag are slightly different. So sometimes you do need to take the customer feedback and shape it in terms of formal market research. But I can truly say that the customer service team, our customer love team, is at the heart of everything we do in this organisation. So after launching nearly 4 years ago, we started in Auckland, then we went to Hamilton, then Wellington, then then Tauranga, then Christchurch, and we've now pretty much gone everywhere. Nelson, New Plymouth, Hawke's Bay, Dunedin. We just launched in Invercargill last month, and Sydney and Melbourne about 18 months ago. So we're pretty nationwide now, and the model changes and evolves all the time because people approach us all the time. So we have to be really fluid and really flexible and able to go, okay, now let me give you an example of that. In the beginning, because we don't own the warehouses and we don't own the vans, we were worried that there wouldn't be enough couriers to deliver the food. And as the business got bigger and bigger, we're now turning over well over $100 million, more people decided that they could be a courier on a Sunday for my food bag. So because the demand was there, the supply came. And so we didn't allow ourselves to go, oh, we can't go past 10,000 deliveries because there won't be enough, etc., etc., etc. So then what happened was other organisations came to us and said, gosh, we've got spare capacity in our warehouse or our fleet, and we've ended up really not having any physical constraints. So as you can see there, we've now delivered well over 13 million dinner kits. We've actually, as we've got bigger, we've now gone from just the shareholders working in the business to over 100 staff. We've actually accelerated the rate of product development. So our launch of new products and the complexity has actually accelerated. Many entrepreneurial startups slow down as they get bigger, and we're working really hard to make sure that doesn't happen. We've only just now introduced one person full-time in HR. The owners have done the HR. We are it, because we want to, really avoid some of the traps that we see happening in some large organisations. So 2 months ago, we launched Bargain Box. Anyone here on Bargain Box? Yeah. Okay. Now that was interesting because vegetarian bag and gluten-free bag, customers were calling us saying, vegetarian bag, gluten-free bag. Going to Invercargill, actually Taupo is another good example, we were petitioned. They came onto the website. All these people, please come to our postcode. So really grabbing our attention. But Bargain Box sort of didn't really happen like that. We looked to see why some customers were leaving, and price was sometimes mentioned. We looked to see why customers were leaving, and sometimes you don't have a bag big enough for my family. There's 6 in my family. And so we created Bargain Box as a sort of a no-frills alongside my food bag with slightly lower price points and bigger quantities. And it has gone gangbusters. We are growing my food bag as fast as we ever were, and Bargain Box as well. So, there's no limit to the potential of the proposition of fresh food and convenience. Everybody would want this if we can get it to put it together in the right way. I'm just going to pause talk about just a few lessons that we've learned and then wrap up and open up for questions. The first thing we've learned, and you guys know this because of what you do, is that you need excellence in both the online systems and the physical delivery. We're sometimes referred to as an e-commerce business, but that's only very partially true. It is, of course, the case that we have no retail outlets, that you can only order online and you can pause, change your order, go gourmet bag, classic bag and family bag all in the same month by moving it around. So you interact with us a lot online, and we have great customer intimacy with our customers online. We're emailing our customers every week, at least every week. However, it's the physical delivery that really matters, as much as that, if not more. When I'm home on a Sunday, I want the guy rocking up, giving me my order correctly at the time that I'm expecting it. And I want to have no missing ingredients, and I want the recipes to be quick to prepare and delicious. So I don't want very much, right? But I just want what all our customers want. And we do our damned best to deliver that, and mostly we do. But you do need to do both. We live in an and world. The internet has not replaced the fact that the physical delivery still matters, but it has replaced the options customers have about how they get that physical delivery. And it's not just my food bag. A category that I never thought could work online, designer fashion. I've already told you that it's near and dear to my heart. I never thought that net-a-porter would work. I couldn't imagine how women would go online and order fancy, expensive dresses and get it sent by courier and send it back if it wasn't the right size. But that business has gone gangbusters. And so new models are developing for companies and categories that never existed before. This category globally is called the dinner kits category, and America has many companies doing it. You might have heard of Blue Apron. Europe has many companies doing it. So you need to be good at both. It's no good if we had a great online, but the physical delivery wasn't good, and it would be no good if the physical delivery was good, but when you tried to interface back into customer service online, you didn't get a response. You have to be good at both. I mentioned this before. The pace of change means we can never say, stop, we're getting off the wheel, we just hold it like it is. We can never say that. We have to, every week, observe what's happening and go, okay, so I think we need to think about changing where we pick and pack. We need to think about opening up this postcode. We need to think about changing mushroom supplier. Moana's boats, the fish is caught at sea on a Friday morning. Storm at sea, we can't do that. We're not going to be able to have the same fish in Auckland and Wellington to let our customers know. Everything changes every day. And I do think the internet has speeded that up. But because we're working with food, you've got climatic things, you've got all the things that farmers also and horticulturists deal with. So that need to actually stay flexible and fluid and not, you've got to be clear where you're going, but able to manage flexibly what happens on the journey. Taking the business to scale, this has meant early joiners and the original shareholders working together to take the business to scale. And that is a phenomenon of our time. Of course, what's big business today in many cases was once a small business, and so this is not a new set of skills, but it's a very interesting transition when you can no longer put all 20 staff together in one room and talk, when you have now people at different locations, and you have to actually work really hard to keep the culture as lively as it was when the company was smaller. Working on the business versus working in the business. We are very clear that when we're out, we don't have board meetings in the office. We have working meetings in the office. We always have our board meetings out of the office, and we work on strategy stuff and review financials, and we all know that we're wearing a board hat at that time, not an operational hat. And finally, expanding to Australia. That has been a real challenge. It is a really different market. In the beginning, we thought that we could transfer quite a lot of the recipes, and do you want to know how many recipes we've been able to transfer this year? Yeah, 5 or 6, not very many. Completely different market. In certain parts of Sydney, carbohydrate is a dirty word. And if you are going to have a carbohydrate, it can't be a humble potato, it's got to be an ancient grain. So you have to actually think about differences, there's not as many differences in New Zealand as you might think. I mean, climatically, there's obviously differences. But in terms of the feedback, we wouldn't say that we have patterns of differences between the South Island and the North Island, but we do see that in terms of Australia and New Zealand. I strongly believe that each of us has the power, and indeed an optimal life is created by shaping our own destiny. If I knew at 25 what I know now, I would have told myself not to be in such of a hurry. I think that life is a marathon, not a sprint, and that women can do anything. You can have a family, you can have a career, you can represent your country in sport, you can do it all, but you can't do it all between breakfast and morning tea. But probably my biggest realisation now, as I think about how I spend the next, 2 or 3 decades of my life, is coming back to where I started in terms of sense of purpose. Some of my business career, the amazing journey of telecom, the amazing journey of my food bag, have been stimulating, challenging, full-on, fantastic people, great moments. But so in the last decade have been some of the things I've done on the not-for-profit side. When I left telecom, my dear friend took me to the Wellington SPCA. And it was particularly, I'd always supported the SPCA financially, but never volunteered. It was a particularly cold day, and they had an influx of animals. And so they converted the aviaries outside to hold cats as well, because there wasn't enough room. They'd taken the birds out, obviously. And they put the plumpy cats outside. And I looked at that and I thought, I think I'd be outside. I couldn't believe that we couldn't do better for the animals than that. And I started to work with Margaret, my friend, to turn the historic old building that was owned by the council but was not used, historic building, every window broken, needed repair all the time but wasn't too big to have a use. Over 5 years, we turned the centre around financially and created a new animal care hospital there. Has anyone seen that? Anyone here been to the... Few of you have been there, yeah. It was opened by the Governor-General 2 years ago, nearly 10,000 people there. The day before that, 2 months before that I walked around it with my friend Polly, who was also on the board, we just walked around it in tears, that we had been able to be part of something so special that was creating something for the community forever, really. That we were on a sort of a 50-year lease with that building. So there's a lot of satisfaction to be had by doing something for others as well. And I set up a girls' educational program with my friend Denise Arnold in Tauranga, who's a lawyer, Cambodia Charitable Trust. It's a country wrecked by genocide. And going there last summer, into the shacks of the girls' families, they can't speak English, of course, but our team on the ground there all speak Khmer and English to the level of interpreters, so they were interpreting. To have their mothers, sometimes their fathers, but not always, and their grandmothers come and touch us and thank us that their daughter was getting the chance for an education. Often we'd hear, we had 6 children, and the eldest 3 have gone to Thailand. Well, you can imagine what that might be. And the youngest 3 are in school, and thank you because you're supporting this one or that one or whatever. So for $500 a year, a girl over there can have a year's education, a bike, uniforms, food. It's a small amount of money. It's what I would spend in coffees in, I don't know, not very long. Multiply 450 by, what's that, 10 coffees? No, 100 coffees? Okay, a month. Anyway, the point is that a little goes a long way, but the joy of being involved in that sort of program. Now, different for everybody. You should do what you feel passionate about. I get approached all the time. I've chosen, and that for me, it's about opportunities for women and girls, because I'm so pleased that my parents had me here, and I had that in animals. I have such a soft spot for animals who can't speak for themselves. But for other people, it will be something different. But give of your time, because that's, it comes back to you in spades. So that's it, really. Let me just stop there and see if there's anyone who's brave enough to ask a question. Now, please do. I love to have a little bit of interaction. I'm not sure how much time we've got, but surely we've got time for one or two questions. Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. So are you talking about my food bag or what? Yep. Okay. So first of all, and this is not a judgment, everyone should just figure out what works for them. We always wanted it to be a big business. So I think you do have to decide, because there's nothing wrong with a boutique business. There's nothing wrong with a boutique business with high margins aimed at a certain target market, and I've definitely got another business like that. But this was always going to be aimed at, this was always intended to be to scale it up. So we started with that intention. So first of all, we took a risk. We went and borrowed quite a lot of money from the bank. I mean, obviously, we'd all put some money into it. And we went and borrowed quite a lot of money from the bank. So we took a risk because we knew we were going to need that. We decided from the beginning to over-deliver. Were any of you on my food bag in the first 2 months? Yeah, so much food, right? I mean, we'd say it would feed 2 to 3, but actually it would have fed 6. Because we thought people are going to be a bit sceptical. Some are going to try it. We knew that word of mouth would be important. We didn't realise how important. After we'd been going about 6 months, there were some primary schools in Auckland where you'd go and you'd trip over the food bags because the kids were bringing them in to use for, collage or class or whatever. But anyway, word of mouth was really important, so we really wanted to make sure that the early experience was good so that it grew fast in the beginning. But we did TV advertising straight away, which some companies wouldn't do. Pretty much straight away we did TV advertising. Of course, we had the lovely and wonderful Nadia Lim, who was working night and day, doing media, as well as at that stage, nearly all the recipes. And so we had that intention. We built a website that we wanted to scale. We found that there were some issues, and so we changed provider and, in fact, redid the back end while keeping the front end constant. And now we have an in-house IT team because we need to make so many developments so fast, we really can't find a provider to keep up with us. So I would say that we over-invested in systems and the quality of the food, and we all worked really hard, and everyone still does, but we would hire the next chef into the kitchen just before the ones that were there were going, we need somebody else. We would invest ahead of the wave of volume coming at us. We worked really hard every Monday to review what happened on the Sunday, to work with our courier company, to interface into our suppliers. Obviously we took risks. We signed lots of personal guarantees to all the suppliers for food, otherwise we never would have got going. So we did take risk, and that's not always in the Kiwi psyche. So, some people can't do it. They're not prepared to put a mortgage over their house. Again, I'm not being critical. I'm just saying that some people can sleep at night with that hanging out there, and some can't. So we took risks. We built the business for scale. We were never satisfied. Wherever we were, we celebrated it. We have spin the wheel. I'm missing spin the wheel today. Spin the wheel on a Friday afternoon. We celebrate our successes for the week. We spin the wheel. We staff nominate staff, and we just have a wine and a chocolate and go back to work after that. But it's great fun for half an hour or so. We celebrate success, and then we're relentless about the next thing. So if you think about the My Food Bag culture, it would be like, that is fantastic, and now we are going to. That is fantastic, and now we are going to. I can't really describe it any more than that. It's a relentlessness, it's a valuing of individuals. We do have a lot of fun. It was our original advertising agency strategy who came up with the idea with a foodie middle name. When they were presenting back, they said, Celia Cos Robinson and James Ravioli Robinson. That was just a gimmick. It wasn't And we looked at it and we said, that's a freaking good idea. So let's give ourselves foodie names. So I called myself Theresa Turmeric Gattung, because turmeric is my daily medicinal. There are whole books on cancer with chapters on turmeric. It's fantastic for any ailments. Anyway, so I'm Theresa Turmeric Gattung, and it was really funny because our wonderful CFO, Karen Anderson, who started part-time because she had children and the business was smaller then, but as the business has grown, she's gone to full-time and she won CFO of the Year last year. She loves Indian food, and her name is Karen Anderson. So we're sitting in Sydney, actually, with our Indian Australian banker, giving him our cards, looks at our cards and goes, Theresa Turmeric Gattung, Karen Anderson, can I come and work for you guys? Well, you sort of are. Can you give us a better interest rate? Anyway, so we have lots of fun, but that's the energy that's created by a team who are aligned and going for it. So the metrics of success haven't changed. Everybody is bonused on the same thing, which is that intersection of gross margin, financial measure, and customer satisfaction. Customers rate the recipes. The team on a Monday afternoon pore over the customer ratings and the customer comments. And just think about the poor chefs. Every dish they serve up gets rated. And so they have this, it's like, so obviously if you don't perform, you don't last, because it's nowhere to hide. There's nowhere to hide. So it's a place where people are learning, developing their skills. And of course, because the company has got a great brand and they're learning a lot from the people that are there, we have a lot of people who want to come and work for us. So I didn't realise that the industry, food industry, we're full of people who've made their careers in food. They only want to work in food. So we can get very experienced people. And like I said before, we're easy to find. People come to us and say, please, please, please hire me. And sometimes we do. If not then, later. And we've had people from the beginning who joined us our very first week, who were university students, who were the part of the Sunday driving squad because we didn't have enough career drivers, who now work full-time in the business. So it's been, I don't really want to use the word family because 110 is a bit big. But it's got a very deep-seated collegial spirit and a focus on, we do very much a focus on growth, but a focus on putting customers first. Do you remember the spinach scandal? When we were found out that there was a possibility that there was a food poisoning issue with the spinach, and it showed up on the first test. There needed to be a second test. And that day was the 12th of April this year. And Nadia was in hospital having her baby, and I was in hospital with a very serious illness. I was completely out of it. So Celia was in the office, and she made the absolute right decision when she was told that there might be a problem to tell the customers immediately. Now, as it turned out, the second test yesterday there wasn't a problem, but we'd already told our customers dump that spinach. Because we could tell who'd got the spinach, because we know. If you go to a supermarket, who would you know who's come and bought it? So we put the customer centricity of absolute, total transparency with our customers and fast communication ahead of worrying about how that might look for our brand. Because food poisoning would be a serious issue for us. That would be a serious issue for our business. So, we're relentless, but we totally believe in doing the right thing at the right time. I think I've only partly answered your question, but anyway, I've given you a few hints. And I enjoyed telling the story. Right, somebody else. Maybe time for one more? I'm definitely eating into the next speaker's time now, so one more.
Hi, I'm just interested, how do you handle rejection? For example, we all come up with lots of good ideas.
Yeah.
Rejected over and over and over again.
Yeah.
How do you turn it around and how do you keep going?
You know what? That's a very good question. I was thinking about that just this morning because I'd experienced some rejections in my personal life lately. And I was thinking about that and wondering, why doesn't it get easier with age? Now, having overshared with you all, well, first of all, what I think you do get better at as you get older is not to take it personally. It's like we're all the centre of our own universe. But that day I was in hospital on a drip, completely out of it, was my birthday. And so I had all these friends posting on Facebook, I didn't reply for a week. And so they're all thinking, what the? You know, it's like something really big is going on in my life. I'm collapsed. So it's like you don't know don't take it personally. It could be any number of, it might not be about you. It's about them. Their life is about them. And I remember a very deep professional disappointment quite early on was when I didn't win Young Executive of the Year many years ago. And I felt I should have done. And I called Sharon, my mentor, and she said, well, Theresa, she said, I know you feel disappointed, but you don't know whether the person who won, whether this will be so important in her life that, you know, it's just, you know, life-changing for her. Well, I think it did end up being very important in her life, and it ended up making no difference to my life. It didn't stop me becoming CEO of Telecom, whether I won that award or not. Something else happened a few years ago. I was told by a lecturer that I should have actually got a higher grade than I got in my paper. It was just like, well, can't do much about it 20 years later. It's like it didn't matter. Of course I would have loved to have had that A+, but it just didn't matter 20 years later, but it might have mattered if I'd let it impact on my self-esteem at the time. So I think having a perspective that life's a very long time and we all go through ups and downs, and there is, sometimes we're on top of the wave, sometimes we're under the wave. Nobody's life is as charmed from the inside as it looks from the outside. That's the first thing. And secondly, don't take it personally. There's always things to learn, but everything's a co-creation, and it might be about the other person and the other situation. However, if you end up in a situation where your general feeling is one of rejection, I would leave it, because it will impact, you know, if it's an occasional thing, but if it's a general thing, I would look for a situation that's more affirming, because I think over time we do better in our best space. So just to round that out, I am not and never have been a believer on working on my weaknesses. I believe that I'm at my best and happiest working in my happy space, in my flow zone, and I surround myself with people who like to do and are good at the things that I'm not good at. And so if I'm rejected, I think, okay, and I try and just stay in my flow zone, in my happy space. So I'll give you an example of that. My assistant for the last 20 years lives in Nelson. Her name's Chris. She's fantastic, and she loves doing everything that I don't love doing. That drives me balmy. She likes to have a list and be able to tick it off at the end of the day when she, you know, finishes work for the day. Well, I don't think in terms of little lists. I think in terms of big things. And lists of things to tick off and do force me into a space that I am going to be very bad at. So if ever I manage my own diary, it's a disaster. Because I don't think like that. I'm structured, I like numbers, I like words, but I have to actually be able to see patterns and bring it together, not work in the very detail of something. So don't take it personally. Put yourself in a situation where you can be your shining best self, and just remember that life is a very long time. And I'm only in my early 50s, and I've already gone from 0 to hero to 0 to hero. You know, I have been like, you know, oh my God, give her the evil eye. No, she's bad. No, and now I'm a cool girl in school. It's like, who would have thought? And I've got half my life to go. So it's like, just accept that sometimes in life a door opens and we walk into the most amazing opportunity that we could never have foreseen, and then just go, you know, really go for that. And then other times we can be very unfairly treated and feel very upset about it, and just to accept that life offers us all the chance to play every part in the play. We all get to play every part in the play. And that's what makes life amazing. Thank you all very much.